Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board podcast, where we bring in experts in the franchise community to give you actionable, practical advice to help you become better business operators, better franchisors, and build better systems. And I've got a good friend of mine with me today, Cassidy Ford. And man, I've known you, Cassidy, since I think almost day one in the industry. At least I've observed you from afar at first, because if you don't know Cassidy, you probably ought to like get a social media account and like see a case study on like how you can use LinkedIn effectively to promote brands, concepts, and help the community get better. Cassidy's the queen of that. So I'm
Aw,
super glad to have
thanks.
you.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. And the fact that you're watching me from afar from day one is a little creepy, Dave.
Doesn't that sound almost like a stalker? Yeah. No, I don't love social media that much, even though it might not seem like it 'cause I'm on there quite a bit, but I
Sure.
got in and I like to observe what works. And I just saw like you were constantly posting like high quality information and you were engaging with people in meaningful ways. So I built the Dave Hansen playbook a little bit after the Cassidy Ford playbook. Not gonna
Ah, cool. Well, I'm glad to do that. Thanks.
Yeah. Guys, let me tell you why I want Cassidy with us today. So she not only is she awesome and fun, and she's a great karaoke person. That one caught me off guard. She's fun to bring if you guys are going to go out singing. But she started her career. What year was it when you started in franchising, Cassidy?
It was 2012.
Okay. So we're
Yep.
talking over a decade of experience here. And her first experience was a 2 year whirlwind of, Shark Tank, emerging brand, whirlwind of sales, and the snow, they sold what, like 400 units and had 17 open. Like there were a lot of
Hmm.
lessons that she learned being on the inside of trying to help figure this out, that she got a quick MBA in franchising in 2 years.
Sure did.
Yeah. And since then, she's been on like pretty much every aspect of franchising, real estate, franchise development, every aspect of it from both the supplier side and the franchisor side. I didn't realize she did this beforehand and then went into the supplier community. And then she's back with the brand over at Eversmith as a director of franchise development. So she's got a ton of experience. But she's somebody who at age 17 got diagnosed with Tourette's. So if you want to follow her, like look up her work as the franchise ticker, where she's trying to raise awareness, but also just be real with people about the fact that, hey, I've got this challenge and I can be a normal professional and have a very successful life and career despite this thing that's affected me since I was 17. So Cassidy, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we're going to jump into that topic of how do you grow through challenges that you're facing as you're building a brand or just working on life. Tell us more about yourself before we do that.
Exactly. And thanks again, Dave, for having me. You are one of my favorite people, so this is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, my tick started just to start there. You mentioned that I have been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. So my tick started when I was 17, and I actually didn't even get a diagnosis until I was 25.
Mm,
And so 8 years, if you can imagine, of not knowing exactly what was going on, trying to balance out attending college and entering the professional world for the first time and navigating those waters. And some of the responses that I received from people that I worked with and for were not always positive.
mm,
And some of those put downs that you get, they stick with you for a very long time. I still deal with those today, and it's been 20 years. It's really interesting to me where I find, and this is why I founded the franchise ticker in 2021,
mm.
is because I really find that our personal and our professional worlds, at least for me, because my Tourette's is out there. I mean,
Yeah.
people see me tick and they hear me tick, that I can't really separate those two. So when I have certain challenges, I have to compartmentalize or I have to, figure out a way to face those head on rather than just stuffing them back and kind of trying to move on without dealing with something. It's been a wild ride for the last 12 years in franchising, and I love this. I call myself a franchise nerd.
Uh-huh.
It is something where it's been fun to be on both sides of the fence, so to speak. I know there's not sides in franchising, but both as a supplier and a franchisor. I just need to be a franchisee. Someday we'll knock that one off the list too.
Oh, I got you beat there. Multi-unit franchise owner right now.
Yep,
It's
you do
it's
have me beat.
it's hard though. It's hard though to like be in this industry and not find something you're like really passionate about and then be like, ooh, I'm gonna do that. Or like work on
Right.
franchisor side. I've done a lot of coaching with franchise brands now, which is funny because I've only been in the industry actually today. It's been 6 years and 2 days
Oh, wow.
from today.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. But it feels like forever. And part of
Mm,
it is getting in experts and talking to them like you on in this forum where I've learned so much from like the greats in the industry that I just feel like I absorb real well. But man, like there's so much to do and so many brands that need help and coaching. So today I'm really excited to steal some of your time and thanks for being generous with it. But to talk about
absolutely.
challenges. Like, and we've got economic headwinds that people have been facing. Like, it seems really
Right.
relevant and timely to say, and I mean, we've got 2 days until potentially more new changes will be happening in this country, and that can bring
Yep.
new challenges. And so, having people think through, like, how do I just approach overcoming challenges? How do I grow through my challenges? Because my personal philosophy is you always have challenges, and
Hmm.
every time you are confronted with one, you have to make a choice where you become better or you become bitter. And I
Love that.
well, it's true though, and you've been through a lot. So talk to us a little bit about your experience. How do you respond? First, people have tried to limit you all through your adult career. Like, oh, you've
Hmm.
got Tourette's. Like, oh, you're awkward sometimes when that tick starts happening. Like, how do you respond to that when people are trying to limit you because of what they
Yeah.
use a challenge?
It's interesting. To go back for just one second, you said something just now that made me think about the fact that that first company that I was with in franchising, they actually were founded, the brothers founded it in 2008. So election year, middle of economic turmoil,
Yeah.
all of those things. And so that's another lesson that I learned just watching other people and how they deal with, how they respond to things. And like you said, just learning from people who've been there and learning from the greats, that's a huge part of how I think I've developed my response mechanisms to challenging situations or to, how people treat me.
Hmm.
And I was raised with the I guess it's not a moniker, but a phrase that says God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And I think that that is a wise saying that I have tried to remember is that even in a moment, it could be a momentary, just passing second when someone says something to me and I have a chance to respond. And I may not feel equipped to respond to that, but I have been called by God or by the universe or by the situation or whatever it is. It is my moment to respond positively, efficiently, effectively, and in a way that is going to lead to a good outcome, right? And that's a hard thing to do in a split second.
Oh yeah.
And so to answer your question, to go back to that, when I was 17 and my tics started, it was a slower process and of me learning as an almost adult, you can consider that an adult at that point, but as an adolescent, um, it's a slow process, it's a slow burn, but it is a quick baptism by fire too, because it just happened out of nowhere and I luckily had a sense of humor and could deal with the why are you jerking your head or why are you whistling or whatnot. In college, same thing. My friends were great. My first job out of college, I worked with some folks who really gave me a tough time about it. And I experienced comments of things like, you'll never be able to work in the corporate world. You'll never be able, you're annoying. You make too much noise and you bother other people. And I hadn't at that time been diagnosed with the condition yet. So that was just tough to hear. And eventually I was diagnosed and I understood how to mitigate some of the symptoms and I've learned how to kind of transition my tics. You can't see me off camera. I've been flicking my wrist, right, instead of snapping. But it helped tremendously. As well as at the same time, I went to work at How Do You Roll, which was my first franchise company, the one that was on Shark Tank, and that we kind of exploded the growth there. But that team I just learned to be open and honest. The first deal I ever closed at How Do You Roll, I threw a fork at the candidate at Discovery Day dinner because of one of my ticks. And I was just honest. I was like, I didn't mean to throw that fork at you, but I have Tourette syndrome and that's just, it is what it is. And because of my
Uh-huh.
transparency in that moment, they responded well to me. right? So that sense of humor, being transparent, just saying, "Hey, this is the situation of what, I am going through at this moment, and I don't know, where that comment is coming from, but I'm going to take it and run with it, and I'm going to turn it into a positive thing." And sometimes I don't even respond directly to that person, but it'll eat away at you if you let it, and you can't dwell on stuff like that. So we're never going to feel like we're completely ready to head off a challenge or handle it. I'm not a parent, but I've heard that about parenthood is
Mhm.
you're never going to be fully ready or feel fully capable. I'm thinking about this because I babysat a 5-month-old all weekend. But it's one of those things that you just in the moment have to use the skill sets that you have and go for it. And you can't second guess yourself, and if you fail at it, then you learn a lesson, and the next time maybe you won't fail at it.
Yeah,
So
I
those
love
are
that.
some things that I've learned through the years.
Yeah, well, and you never stop learning. I had a conversation with my 20-year-old this weekend about a job, and he's not loving it, so he's gonna put in his 2 weeks notice. And there's some things that he got feedback on from one of his managers he didn't love.
Hmm.
It's like, look, like you two things happen in life. Either you succeed or you learn. And it sounds like we're learning right now. And he's like, yeah, a little
Yeah,
sheepishly, but like, and it's okay. Like I learned the same lessons. I just, learned them differently than he did, but
yeah.
we all have to learn those lessons of like how to prioritize or what's important. And these emotional things I think are harder. Like it's easy to figure out like how to show up to
Hmm.
work on time or like how to interact with your coworkers, but like when you're dealing with a real challenge, and, you throw a fork at somebody during discovery, not a normal approach,
No,
Cassidy, but if you
no,
close the deal,
I
well
did.
done. Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about those lessons learned, and especially where that crossover is. I was in a point in my life where I probably hadn't ever been in a darker point in my life after feeling like I had been torn down by some other people that I had allowed to be in my orbit that were negative and that were not, I allowed that to happen. But it wasn't my fault what they said to me, but I had the power to remove myself from that situation, and I did. But my confidence was just destroyed at that point. And I went to a job interview. I did everything possibly wrong I went to the wrong place. I wore the wrong clothes. I thought I was interviewing for a different job. Everything could go wrong, went wrong. And I bombed the interview. And after that, the person who was interviewing contacted me and said, "Hey, I have some constructive criticism for you. And you're great, but you need to work on your confidence."
Mhm.
And that's the first time in my life anybody had ever told me that because I'm a confident person. So they actually referred me to a guy named Yen Young, who was the founder of How Do You Roll. And I took that criticism, turned it around, fake it till you make it, went into that interview with Yen, and he hired me. That was my first job in franchising because someone took a chance and gave me that criticism, the
Mhm.
constructive feedback, and then I decided to run with it instead of just kind of breaking down with it. That was a turning point for me, not just in my career, but in my personal life too.
Yeah, you said something super important there that I want to just make sure we highlight. Like you made a conscious decision, right? To accept the feedback. A lot of people don't think to solicit for feedback and say, "Hey, how'd I do?" But I had a moment not long ago with the team where we did a webinar. And normally I'm a guest on webinars. We do podcasts or like other things, right? People ask me to
Hmm.
present, so or to other team members present. But it's the first time we've done our own like ClientTether webinar. And it was pretty well attended. And
Good.
after we were done, I said, "All right, guys, now I need the feedback." And I was expecting like, I'm the boss. So I was like, everyone's gonna be, "Oh, you did such a good job." But I've asked them not to do that a bunch in the past, and they didn't. And they took their
Good.
gloves off and like, "Hey, like this was good, and you need to work on this, and you probably shouldn't go down that road, or that was sounded kind of negative." And like, and I at first like my reaction was like, like I was a little bit like, "Oh, dang, like
Yeah.
that cut close to the bone." And then I uh and then I realized like this is exactly what I needed. Like I had to accept
Yeah.
it. Like I had to humble myself enough to absorb the feedback and let it become part of me so I could become better. And
Hmm.
you're describing that exact process, right? Where you had to absorb the feedback and accept it. even if it's wrong. You mentioned a good Christian theme about being equipped versus being called.
Hmm.
And one of the things I always tell people, this is my is it I principle, right? Like the Savior's in the room for the Last Supper with all of his apostles he'd been with for years, a couple of years now, right? And he's like, one of you is going to betray me. And then they all said, is it I? They all
Hmm.
said that. One of them knew it was him, but they all were like, wait, is it going to be me? And I think like that's a part of like personal vulnerability that's got to become
Yeah.
part of our psyche, or else you'll never get better. You'll just get bitter throughout life.
I never thought about that scenario that way. That I will not ever look at that story the same way again now. So, you know, you say that and it's really interesting. The vulnerability part of things or just the I am super paraphrasing Socrates right now, but I think it was Socrates that said basically an unexamined life is not worth living. That's a huge paraphrase. But
That's a good statement.
that's one of those things where you constantly have to be looking at yourself and evaluating things and then have the wherewithal for that, or not the wherewithal, but the self-awareness and the willingness to adjust in order to face the situation. And that's especially true if you're headed up against an obstacle. Here's another story. My company, I moved from Austin to Atlanta 10 years ago, actually, next month, to work for Huddle House Corporate. I was going to be selling franchises and doing resales.
Mhm.
And there had been some franchisee unrest that happens on a kind of normal level when you change a CEO and a private equity company comes in and there's remodels and renewals and resales and things in the natural course of it of a company that's
Mhm.
60 some odd years old, right? There's
Yeah.
growing pains. And so I came into that thinking, I've got this. I have all this energy. I know how to fix this.
Mhm.
And the response that I got back from the franchisees when I first got there was, well, it was full of cuss words, to be honest. But it was not a good response from the franchisees. I endeared myself with some of them. But I had to take a step back and say, okay, what approach did I just take? And what approach do they need me to take? Because
Mhm.
when I came in to do this, I had an idea of how I could fix this. And they didn't need someone to fix it, they needed someone to listen.
Mhm.
And so I kind of revamped my approach to things, went back to the franchisees. And
Yeah.
by the time I left Huddle House, most of them were very sad to see me go. Almost all of them. They still get in touch with me sometimes. And so it's a thing that living that examined life or being willing to be vulnerable with yourself to admit, hey, I was wrong or I failed. What do I need to do to fix this or to learn from it is huge when you're thinking about, hey, this situation is probably going to come around again at some point because that's just how history works. And I need to be prepared for it the next time.
Yeah. And the reality is you don't always know how to approach it, so you have to be
Right.
dynamic, right? I think of like Kevin Harrington. I really like the guy a lot. He was one of the first sharks on Shark Tank. And he said, I'm paraphrasing him now, not quite a Socrates paraphrase, but I was at a conference he presented right before I did. And he said this at the close up. He's like, look, I'm not smarter than everybody else. In fact, he said, there are actually a lot of people in this room smarter than me. He's like, but what I do better than everyone else is I'm not afraid to to make a mistake and then learn from
Hmm.
it and then iterate. And he's like, my superpower isn't that I get it right faster or first more than anyone, but I iterate faster than everybody else. So I get to the right conclusion quickly. He's like, but you just have to be unafraid of making mistakes, being vulnerable, adjusting,
Hmm.
trying something new, adjusting and trying something new until you get it right. There's no other way to do it. I've kind of stuck with me that
Yeah.
everything is kind of like that.
There's a new song out by this Australian artist that I really like. And one of the lyrics in the song, and I've had this stuck in my head, so that's why I'm thinking about this. But I think it goes something like, the greatest glory is not when we fail, but when we rise, when we've fallen. And that is also a paraphrase because that is not exactly verbatim. But I love that because in that point in time when you're rising, I'm at the point in my life where when I get up off the floor, I groan And like I have to do one foot first, and I don't just spring up off the floor at this point. I have to do one foot under the other, and then I can slowly raise myself up because my bones are creaking at this point. So, but that's what I think of when I'm rising after I fall. It is not just I'm springing up and I am automatically,
Mhm.
back on top of the world or back on my feet. It is a process sometimes, and there's some groans in there and some of those growing pains or just pains, aches and pains.
Yeah.
So, um, but I think about that when I imagine, what that process will look like. I do have a choice of what my attitude is going to be, what
Mhm.
my outlook will be, how I'm going to treat other people in that time frame. This summer, I didn't have an air conditioner. It seemed like everything that could go wrong this summer went wrong. And I kept telling myself to keep my temper in check because if I let that I was like a cup and I had a crack in the cup. And if I let that crack deepen anymore, and I let some of that liquid out inside, which was my temper inside of my little body, then that cup was going to shatter.
Mhm.
And I didn't need to lose that control over what I knew that I had control over. And that is my responses.
Mhm.
And that's a choice that we make. And that's a recurring theme,
Yeah, that's true. You can't control the environment, but that's why you focus on what you can control. I
right?
appreciate that. Tell me, so you've mentioned a few things that I want to circle back to, which is sometimes you have a belief or something you feel like you need to do that
Hmm.
isn't maybe popular. Like how do you like emotionally stand behind that? Sometimes you'll be like, I know this is the right thing to do, and maybe when you decided just to start listening to the people at Huddle House rather than try to take action and change things immediately, maybe
Hmm.
that wasn't real popular because they were expecting results faster. You never know, but tell me, can you share an example where you've had to stand behind something you believe, and then how do you have the emotional energy to do that when it doesn't feel popular and maybe even seem right to everyone else?
I'll give a good example of this. And I don't know if I've ever told this story in detail. Maybe I have. Um, when I was at How Do You Roll, and I was in my early or mid 20s and brand new on the scene, super green. And I saw that we were selling so many franchises because it was very popular, that it had a great response from Shark Tank. We had so many leads coming in, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leads. And I recognized very early on that that was going to be a problem. Selling 40 packs and 30 packs and going overseas and this part of the country and that part of the country. And it's just, you start to see that there's a problem. And I've talked about this before, with our founders, and like this is it's an open story as far as I'm concerned. But they there was a conversation that I needed to have expressing, my opinion that was
Mhm.
going to be unpopular, that we needed to stop selling franchises because we needed our infrastructure to catch up so that we could support our franchisees. And, sometimes you just have to know that the response that you're going to get is not the response that you want to get. And you have to be okay with that, but you also have to be okay with the consequences of it. Meaning, I have a choice then again to walk away, I can stay, I can do everything in my power to ameliorate a situation. But that's regardless of what you choose is a very difficult decision. And expressing your opinion when you know that it's going to be disagreed with, um, don't do it lightly. And I'm one of those people that I don't always think before I speak, which is not not the greatest, but over the years, I've really had to practice that. And so, having a network around you as well of mentors or trusted advisors, a circle that is tight knit, that I'm going to share this with you and it's not going to go anywhere, but I need your wisdom and your advice on how to handle this situation. Just don't go in blindly. Don't go in shooting from the hip. Those are
Yeah.
those are things that it makes it a little bit easier to stand your ground and know that you're right. And even if you're not right, sometimes we're not always right, but you have to do it. If you firmly believe something and you believe that it's the right thing to do, and you walk away from that and don't do it, you're going to look back one day and you're going to regret it.
Mhm.
And I don't have very many regrets in life at all. And I think that I feel that way because I was taught as a child. I have some amazing parents. I have an amazing family and a village of people who raised me. And that's one of the good things that they taught me is just to speak up if there's something that I feel needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
And that's not popular all the time. But it usually, when done tactfully and respectfully, is
Mhm.
going to be the right thing to do.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, I mean, how did it go? You kind of started framing that up like I needed to share this thing. So what happened when you
We
said that?
talked about it. We kept selling. We sold 435 units. We opened 17. I think you mentioned that at kind of the outset of this episode. But I ended up moving to Atlanta to work for Huddle House. And How Do You Roll closed their doors eventually. And it's one of those lessons that's I think I told you previously, I think I learned from that experience every possible lesson in franchising, whether a micro lesson or a huge macro lesson, that you could learn at some point through the 2 years that I spent at How Do You Roll. And I'm very grateful for that time. I'm very grateful for the people that were there that invested in me and that are brilliant and amazing. And I wouldn't be here now if it weren't for the lessons I learned and ran with, and good ones and bad ones. You can say that about any place that I've worked at least.
Yeah, same. I mean, I've worked at places where I grew so much, and not always because the executive team there were mentoring me with good lessons. Sometimes I learned from silly mistakes and poor decisions, but it's still learning all the same. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you're grateful for it.
It's an
How do-
emerging brand situation. I've worked for an emerging brand and an iconic legacy brand. And both of those same outcomes of I walked away grateful and knowing that I had learned and grown.
Mhm.
And that is something that I worked hard for intentionally to be able to say that after I moved on to that next amazing opportunity that I've had.
Mhm. Well, you kind of transitioned nicely into a question I want to ask you,
Hmm.
Cassidy, which is how do you embrace the change? Because we talk about a little bit about how do you stand behind what you're believing, and how do you work through the struggles when someone tells you you're not good enough, when you might be failing. But how do you
Hmm.
embrace change as just a fact of life? I'm curious because you've made a lot of changes and had to struggle through a lot of changes. So just maybe
Yeah.
not too long ago, now that you're with Eversmith Brand, now a platform company, right? So emerging, iconic, and now conglomerate. That's a cool
Yeah.
environment. That's a change though. So how do you embrace change?
You know, we could have a whole episode just about embracing change.
I agree.
So, the first thing I'll say to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier is you cannot hold grudges. You
Mhm.
can't dwell on things. You have to figure out how to move on. And if you can't move on, you move through it. You have to sit in it for a minute and then work your way through it. But you can't grasp onto something in the past and let that hold you back from moving forward. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing I would say. Luckily for me, I have a really bad memory. So when someone says something rude to me, sometimes it just kind of goes, it's like water off a duck's back, as Jinx Monsoon would say. But there are some other aspects of that too, where we talked about transparency and vulnerability.
Mhm.
And if I know some people in my life who are not great at change or evolution, but they won't tell you when they're struggling. And I am not always going to be in tune to know, hey, this major change just happened. I'm keeping an eye on this person, but I can't see that they're actually struggling trying to adapt in this moment because
Mhm.
they're not telling me. And one of the things that I learned a lot because of my Tourette syndrome is that I have to say when I need help. And in the midst of a great period of change and a lot of turmoil, and it doesn't even have, it could be good change, it could be bad change, it doesn't matter. But if you're finding yourself in a position that is overwhelming and you're not sure how to respond to everything that's kind of coming at you, you have to say something to somebody else that you can lean on who
Mhm.
can help you through that. That has been a hallmark of how, I mean, I told you earlier, I went to 17 different schools between preschool and college,
Yeah.
and which is wild to think about, but um, that kind of change prepares you for bigger changes. But there's some obstacles and turns in the road and valleys and peaks that you'll never anticipate. And so when you come across those, you just have to be open to the idea that we're not in control of everything.
Hmm.
So we got to let some of that stuff go,
Yeah.
uh, and ask for help and understand, that I can't hold on to something that's going to hold me back.
Yeah. I love it. There's maybe we wrap up on this, but I grew up in the woods in Illinois, right? Middle of nowhere.
Mm.
And they used to there's some friends of mine that would make what they call a raccoon trap. If you find like a little hole in a tree that is just big enough to get their hands through, you can put some candy or something in there, peanut butter or like whatever, and they'll reach in to grab it and then they can't get their hand out because it's
Aw.
stuck. Stuck when you make a fist, it gets too big and they can't pull it out
Yeah.
of the hole. And so I find people are a lot like raccoons that way. Like there's something that's a problem, right? Their hand is stuck in a tree, and because they won't let go of that stupid little thing that's inside that tree,
Mm.
they're stuck. They're stuck in
Yeah.
the past. They're stuck dwelling on something that's not going to help them move forward. And then the hunter, the farmer comes and gets them, and then things wrap up poorly for that poor raccoon. But
Aw.
I loved what you said about you got to let go of this idea that you can be in control of everything. Like that's not
Hmm.
viable. Have good friends, people you can lean on for feedback or advice. Man, these are nuggets, really good nuggets from someone who I know has lived through them. So we're walking, we're talking about the walk instead of just talking about the talk. I just appreciate it about you.
Well, I appreciate that. And the last thing I'll leave you with too,
Please.
when you're in the middle of a situation, any kind of challenge that you're facing, your journey that you're walking, the story that you're living, the people around you, everybody has their own story. And to understand that you're not the only one in both ways, not to minimize what you're going through and not to make you feel completely alone. There is an entire network of people, myself included, that is in the franchise community is such a great place for sharing best practices and for having open arms and being very generous. And this is a great place to reach out to other people and network and to build that circle, that trusted circle around you, because you never know who's gonna have that same story that you're going through right now.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed. And ironically, often you'll find that many people have had the same experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And somebody's been through it and be like, hey, I nailed it. And now they can share it with you. And you can say,
Yes.
let me take some notes. It happens to me all the time. I'm in a meeting, I'm like, let me grab a sticky note and a pen. I just need to like
Write that
great
down.
idea. Yeah. All the time. And I've even, people I've had competitors or people I shouldn't be getting along with across the table. And all of a sudden I find us collaborating together to solve a
Hmm.
problem. And I guess the thing I'd add to that is also don't rule people out of the potential solution set. Because you'd
Yes,
be surprised sometimes how some unassuming person can actually help you solve a real problem if you're able to be vulnerable, right? And get some
sure.
help. Yeah.
Totally.
Cassidy, you're fantastic. Thanks for being my guest today and sharing so many good stories and experiences. If somebody wanted to reach out to you just to connect and maybe glean some more from your experience, how's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yes, my cell phone number is plastered all over the internet. It's also on my LinkedIn profile, so send me a text. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Cassidy Ford, at the end of that standard LinkedIn URL. So I would welcome any new connections out there because I love getting to connect with folks out in this space.
Mhm. Yeah, I know you do. Cassidy, you are fantastic. I sure appreciate you. And we'll have to do another episode sometime and dive deeper into what we were wrapping up on today. Thank you.
Yes, we would.